Welcome back, everyone, to 8x Pixel Expo 8 monthly webinar global webcast, the September series. So as usual, it happens every 8th of the month where we come together to celebrate for a united cause. That is our love for the ocean and also diving and also underwater photography, definitely. So for this session, we are going to be talking about Pixel 101, a collaborative session that we're working together with Wet Pixel. And for this session, it will be talking about capturing stories that connects us to water, hosted by Adam Hanlon, and also, of course, Zena Holloway. So I will not wait any longer. I shall pass this session over to Adam to get it all started. Adam, over to you.
Thanks, Nora. I'm very privileged today to be joined by Zena Holloway. Zena is a UK-based underwater photographer, although widely travelled, and produces the most amazing and iconic fine art imagery, or is well known, should I say, for producing the most amazing fine art iconic imagery. And so it's super exciting to have her on here and to be able to chat to her about her creative process a bit. So over to you, please, Zena.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to share a slideshow that I put together. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Hopefully it'll work.
I love the picture of the sea fans in the background. They're lovely.
Oh, thank you very much. So can you all see that? Is that working?
Yep, looks good to me.
Great.
Perfect.
So this is an image of me in the Red Sea. I was fresh out of school and I managed to blag a job becoming a dive guide and then went on to become a scuba instructor in the Red Sea. I worked in the Cayman Islands and then I traveled around for about 3 years and then decided to come back to London really to pursue try to pursue a career in underwater photography. I hadn't really thought too much about it. And then I realized when I got home that we didn't have very much lovely, fresh, clear water. So I ended up a lot in swimming pools. And what better subject than babies? So much of my career was built on photographing babies at the start, which was quite a new thing at the time. And I was fortunate enough because it gathered quite a lot of attention from editorial, editors and advertising companies. And from there, I was able to spin off and do lots of other interesting jobs, working with some really, really cool people. I had some access to great stylists, great models, makeup artists. And I also, London is actually a center point for underwater filmmaking. They make a lot of the James Bond, Harry Potter underwater scenes here. So by being able to, have these guys commission me, I was able to work in some of the underwater studios here. And I shot advertising campaigns for people like Radox and perfume companies. I also shot some hair products. And with this one we had to make shine, which was quite difficult underwater.
Yeah.
But we got there in the end.
Yeah.
And then I sort of watched commercials and this one was for O'Neill on the left here for their trainers that they were trying to launch. And I also got to travel with it as well. This I photographed in China and this was a Chinese client who came to London and then a Korean client who commissioned me to shoot for Corone. So along the way I had lots of adventures and I found myself in Sardinia at one point photographing the freediving world championship. And this was an amazing scene because there were all these guys and girls up on the surface 10 meters above me, yelling and screaming, really excited to do this dive that they were going to do. And it was the first time that I kind of realized the noise that you can hear from people on the surface when you're down underwater. It was quite extraordinary. So I captured lots of these images, but it was in a time before digital cameras and only had 36 shots on my roll. So so it all I burnt through my film very quickly, but I did manage to get this one, which was kind of nice. It kind of makes them, to me, they look like tadpoles just kind of swimming in a pond. I worked with, she's a mannequin basically. Not everyone realizes that when they first see it. But it's kind of weird. I had to drill a hole in her head to get her to sink so that the air would escape and she would, sink down. And I was on my own trying to build this mannequin at 4 meters or something ridiculous, and her legs kept falling off. So yeah, she was charming to work with. And yeah, and then I had this idea somewhere along the way that it would be really cool to photograph a silhouette of a seahorse, of a horse underwater. And I discovered that they used to swim, they were swimming racehorses in Barbados. So I just got on a plane basically, and I sat on the beach for about 2 weeks and waited for these guys to trot along with their horses. And I jumped in the water and caught this one, which was kind of cool. But they swim really fast, and they're silent as well. And there wasn't very much space between the bottom and these hooves that were swimming down. So it was a bit dangerous, but it was cool. It was worth it. And this image is of a bed that we built. It took a 3-man dive team about 4 hours to make this bed. They made it at 3 meters. And then the model got in the water, and I thought, okay, this is great. We're ready to go. And then she said, I can't clear my ears. I can't get down. So then I started, oh my God, we're going to have to change the bed depth. So it then took them another 4 hours to dismantle the bed and rebuild it. And so then in the end, I had like 2 hours to shoot an 8-page fashion spread for this magazine, which was quite stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is Deco de Souza, footballer. He was amazing. We filled the football with jelly because obviously if you've ever tried to sink a ball, it's really kind of tricky. It doesn't even go a couple of inches below the surface. So yeah, we filled that with jelly. That was cool. And then I made a little slideshow here. Hopefully I'll be able to play it of kind of backstage of how this shoot went. This was a fashion shoot for a magazine, and this is a model I worked with in London in a swimming pool. He'd never been on scuba before. He'd never swum with sharks before, or on a wreck or anything like that. But I just had the gut feeling that he was going to be amazing, and he was so full of charisma that he really pulled it off. He was great. So this kind of shows how the divers were, where they were positioned, how we were buddy breathing him, the lights in the background. And it also kind of shows how the lens that I was using, I mean, it wasn't the perfect lens because I was using a wide angle lens to cut through the water visibility, to cut through the column of water so that it appeared clearer. But the drawback with using a wide angle lens when you're photographing people is that you get a lot of foreshortening. So his legs look quite stumpy in some of the images, which was less than perfect. But he was so charismatic. I got so many shots. He was just great to work with. And then the final shot, this is the outtake. He decided to open up the umbrella at the end, and he just took off in the current. I mean, it was like something out of Mary Poppins. And all these divers just like vroom to try and get him back. And that was kind of funny. So the common theme I've kind of learned through all these years of photographing different people and things is that all my images are about water and people connecting with water. So there's a human connection that runs through everything. And I found that actually, if you can draw out this human connection, if you can find the narrative that goes with the water and the people, you can have a more kind of engaging image. And so I deliberately went out to go and find the narratives that connect us to water, like stories that connect us to water. And I want to show you this image of a fresco from 1305. And it's showing angels are floating, they're spiritual, they're up in the air. And more importantly, they are weightless. And, down at the bottom is the devil. He's earthbound, he's sitting on the floor and he's grounded. So kind of what I'm trying to get with this is that things that are weightless, that float, have this angelic spiritual quality, which I really try and tap into when I'm underwater. I then went on with this in mind to create images of women floating in white floaty dresses. So you capture this kind of spiritual, kind of angelic story, this narrative. It's kind of subconscious narrative. People don't often realize that they're tapping into, but it really is there. It's a conscious thing. I mean, it's powerful. Another kind of thread that I like to follow is myths and legends. And it seems that the imagination of humans runs wild. When it's concerning the sea and oceans, every nation, every country has different ideas, historical ideas about what lives down there. You know, some people think there are mermaids, some people think there are kelpies and serpents and krakens. And so the more imaginative you can make your creatures and your animals and your people down there, it kind of flows with the storyline of history, you know, the narrative of this myths and legends, which I like.
Yep.
And then coming back to babies again, we are much more connected to the oceans than people tend to realize. And our earliest characteristics when we're growing in the womb are fish-like. So at 4 weeks old, we have fins, not feet. And our heart has 2 chambers, which is a characteristic which is shared by fish. I mean, we grow to evolve to become us, obviously, but the beginning of us, when we're first born, are fish-like, which is kind of interesting. And of course, we float around in our mother's bellies in water for 9 months as well. And weirdly, our blood is similar makeup to the ocean. You know, it's salty. So I kind of like to follow this idea that water is also about birth, about new beginnings, about, you know, purity and that kind of thread. And we're, you know, interesting, we are all programmed to search out water. You know, it's what our ancestors did when they were trying to survive. They settled on rivers, they settled by the coast because they had a good supply of water. And it's why we go to swimming pools, to go and hang out by the, you know, on holiday, to go and hang out by the swimming pools. And, you know, we flock to the coast for holidays to be next to water. So it's a real powerful connection, this need to have water in our lives. But the overarching narrative I find with water is that it connects us to the natural world. When we descend into it, we are surrounded, we're covered, you know, we can't speak, we can't breathe, we don't see much, you know, hearing is changed. And, you know, it's a world where we descend into, which is, you know, purely connected to the natural world. And it transports us to another place. We have a deep emotional connection to it. So with this in mind, I tried to make a series a few years ago that spoke about really what we're doing to the planet. The image on the right with the girl in the black dress was supposed to be a dress symbolizing pollution, and she's set in a scene which is a harbor, which is kind of all full of rubble and, you know, human waste and just damage. And the idea was that, you know, this is what we're doing to our environment, our underwater environment. And the image on the left is about a girl wearing a mirrored dress. What we do to our surroundings, our environment, you know, we do to us. We pollute our environment, we pollute ourselves. And then I traveled to the cenotes of Mexico, which were just the most phenomenal place to work because of all the clear, beautiful water there. And I love these God's fingers that come down from the surface. This natural waterscape is just the most beautiful place to shoot. And it kind of feels space-like when you're down there. It's black, it's weightless. And the series that I made, the narrative became about space, really, which wasn't the way I intended it, but it just kind of grew out of it. So that was kind of an interesting discovery. I also made a series about the Haenyeo of South Korea, which fascinate me because they have knowledge. They harvest the ocean. They go and find. They only gather what they can find with their hands. They don't use any machinery. And they use breath hold, and they teach each other. The women teach their daughters how to dive, how to search for food, and, you know, harvest the ocean. And what's so beautiful about this is that they've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds of years, sustainably, without damaging what's down there, without depleting stocks, without reducing biodiversity. So they're kind of like a shining symbol for me. They're just fantastic, you know. And I made a series about them. Most of the Haenyeo are elderly now, but I wanted to portray them as, you know, glorious young spiritual creatures, and celebrate really their way of life. So those are 2 images that I made in London, in a studio in London. I actually imported this mask from Korea because it's got a Haenyeo's name written on the side of it, which I kind of love. And more recently, I made a series about rivers. And these are the rivers that are close to my home in London. And England is renowned for our beautiful rivers. We are supposed to have rivers that are glorious, that are full of fish. And I went out there thinking, oh, I'm going to use my camera as an eye. I'm going to pop it under the water surface. I'm going to show people how beautiful it is. You know, they're going to love these pictures. And when I got there, it was kind of a different story. And it was actually quite sad. And I put these images out there, but they didn't really take up. It wasn't, you know, there wasn't much interest in it. And yeah, it got me looking at, basically it got me looking at biodiversity loss. And it also got me thinking about the way when I was right back at the beginning of my career in Egypt, and there was some good people who were out there trying to save coral by putting buoys at the top of the coral reefs so that the dive boats could hook up to the buoys without throwing anchors and damaging, you know, what was going on the top of the reef, the corals. And yeah, and that was fantastic, brilliant work. They did a wonderful job. But now the conversation is about saving all coral. I mean, and it doesn't seem to me that we're just doing nearly enough to do that. And I think there's something called the shifting baseline theory, which is fascinating, because it's saying that we will become accustomed to this depleting loss in nature. We will become accustomed to not having big fish in the ocean. If you go back and read, you know, what people were writing in the 1700s, they described the oceans as boiling over with fish. They describe it as having miles and miles of shoals of, you know, of fish swimming in our seas, which, you know, doesn't really happen much anymore. So this got me on a path to reduce my carbon consumption and see what I could do as an individual. And I became interested in the material science and biological processes that are going to set our world in the future. You know, for example, there are people growing chairs out of mycelium, which is mushrooms. And, you know, we can use seaweed for insulation, and we can grow clothes from algae. So I'd seen roots branching out in the rivers, in the river story that I made, and I'd seen these willow roots growing into the water. And I just thought, gosh, that's really amazing. I wonder if you could use roots as a binding agent. So I started making sculptures. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, wow, these look actually like coral. The way these are forming. And I started to make templates to bring them more in that direction. And then I photographed them in a more of a kind of an underwater kind of theme. And it struck me that roots are the building blocks for plant life, but corals are the building blocks for sea life. Corals support 25% of our ocean species, even through, you know, through being eaten or through providing the, you know, the ecosystem. So they're really, really important. And they're not doing very well at the moment. So I carried on building shapes and patterns. This is all in the last year, really, working on this biodesign project and building sculptures that I hoped would kind of getting them closer towards looking like corals. And I just recently built a full-size, I say built, it's not built, I've grown a full-size grass seed sculpture. And what's beautiful about it is that the work is completely biodegradable. So there's a kind of a poetry in making this coral sculpture in a green art way. So it's carbon negative, you know, it's actually doing something a little bit to prevent, you know, future global warming. But going back to my underwater photography, I kind of realized that if you can make a human connection, you can make this a stronger message. So I grew a dress out of grassroots, and I used the coral patterns that I was making to build this dress. And then I made a coral collar and made another coral kind of collar shape. So with this biodesign project, it's really my hope that these root structures and fashions will kind of go on to champion and, you know, in the protection of coral and our oceans. And you could say I'm kind of rooting for a sustainable future. So so that's my narrative. That's me.
Wonderful, Zena. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. It's an amazing journey, I think, that you've had through the underwater world, perhaps we could describe it as. I think what's what's really fascinating is to look at how you've gone basically from producing imagery to actually taking action and producing well, product's the wrong word, but producing designs that are based on your experiences underwater. So as a photographer, how would you see the role of photography now helping to push that process forward? How do photographers go out there and create an awareness or directly impact on the environment?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, of course, our cameras are an eye for what's below the surface. People aren't aware, most people aren't aware of what goes on down there, but we are, because we're down there a lot and we see what's there. I mean, with COVID and everything, people maybe be restricted with their travel. I would suggest, going out closer to home, going to your local rivers, going to, the oceans that surround you, rather than, traveling vast distances, and see what you can find to help promote local charities, environmental charities. There are great images to be captured out there. You just need to be imaginative and, search out these stories that have great narrative, that show what's there, why it needs to be looked after.
And that sort of brings me on to it, kind of, so when you have, well, maybe this is going to be a huge question, but how do you get inspiration? How do you go out and say, right, I'm now going to shoot an image of your series of angels, for example? How did you get the inspiration? Where did that come from? Was it something you saw somewhere else? Where did it come from?
I honestly, I don't know. I think I'm always curious. When I get my camera, I want to go down underwater and I want to see what I can find. And you find a subject that you think has got some meat to it, that you think you can expand on, and you just work with that, really. And I think you just keep visiting the same subject and you build a story. I mean, I don't know if you've seen My Octopus Teacher recently. It's a documentary these guys made in South Africa, and it's just phenomenal. But he spent, however long, years, photographing this one octopus, and he made a fantastic story that's brilliant, because he really focused on one subject. So you get to know a subject really, really well, and then you can reap the rewards of making great imagery and a great narrative, and that, really, you can make it, have some impact.
I think this is an abiding thread that I'm getting from generally when I chat to photographers, is that really successful photographers, the biggest investment they make is time. It's spending time with subjects, it's spending time creating and thinking about photography, and constantly kind of challenging the subjects. And I think we live in a society that increasingly wants everything now and isn't prepared to put the time in. And I think this is certainly something, and you've highlighted it again. Just going underwater and spending time with the subject pays huge dividends.
Yeah, definitely.
In terms of the sort of fine art category of, if we can call it that, that's probably not a fair description, but in terms of the fine art underwater photography, what do you see as being? I mean, it's a genre of underwater photography that is quite popular amongst photographers. Where do you see that going? What's the next frontier in fine art underwater photography, do you think?
Well, I feel very lucky, actually, because I managed to sell lots of prints, to collectors worldwide. It comes back to this idea that people love water. They love being next to water. They love pictures of images of water. Water is a fantastic subject to work with in the art world. And I just think there will always be an appetite for images with water in them. And this human connection is also quite important. If you can capture something that's got kind of an anonymity to it, like, people maybe with their face hidden, or, maybe a suggestion of a hand, or just a suggestion of it's somebody in the image that they can project themselves onto in the image. It is, in my mind, is always a more successful fine art piece. If you're doing an advertising campaign, they want faces, they want you to look at that girl, they want you to see, that personality. But as a fine art piece, people want in their homes, it's more about projecting an anonymity into whoever, whatever you're photographing.
But at the same time, you do need engagement. I think that's what you're saying is, and one of the ways that we create engagement is by allowing people to imagine themselves in the scene. Am I right in saying that? Is that part of the process?
Yeah.
So we don't want it to be so abstract that they don't recognise themselves as potentially being part of the image. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah. It's a really interesting conundrum, isn't it? And I think maybe that possibly is what you've been so successful at, is creating that boundary between anonymity and engagement, because too much in anonymity, it's not engaging. Too much engagement, you don't have the anonymity. So I love one of the comments you made in your PowerPoint was about the fact that we're drawn to water, and certainly my own personal experience, and I'm sure I'm not unique in any way, is that I am very, very drawn to water, and I choose to live my life in and around the water as much as possible. So given that water is a medium that we can typically see through, not always, but typically see through, how do we create that underwater feel in a medium that we can't actually see?
Weightlessness. It always boils down to weightlessness. That is the underlying thing for me. When you're photographing people, more or less, I mean, I can think of a few situations, for example, if you've got a model standing on the bottom of a swimming pool, well, that's kind of doing it because the scene is set. But if you've got a surreal image where you've got a black space or a blue space and you've got a model floating, it really always is about the weightlessness. That gives it the spirituality. It gives it the kind of the aspiration that people want to be in that environment. They want to be free and floating. And
And I mean, I think that was another interesting comment drawing out about the cenotes. And I've spent a lot of time in the cenotes as well, and love them very much. As an environment, but also I get exactly what you mean. And I think I forget who it was, and I should have a list of quotes available, but I don't. But someone described caves as inner space, and I thought that was a really good description. What you were saying really resonated with me, because that again, you have this weightlessness, which is space-like, in this very dark environment, and I think creatively it has so much potential. And well, your beautiful images up. Were they at El Pit, the light rays?
Yeah, no, they were fantastic, just coming down in, and I was very lucky to catch them actually.
No, it's a beautiful place.
It's a beautiful place.
Thank you, Zena. So I'm going to put you on the spot, I'm afraid.
Okay.
If you were to give an aspirant photographer who is looking at carving a niche for themselves, possibly within the underwater imaging scene, within commercial, possibly underwater photography, what would be, you're only allowed to give them one bit of advice. What would that be?
Well, that's tough. I think this is a bit wishy-washy, but I would say just be true to yourself. Honestly, if you're not passionate about what you're shooting, it ain't going to work. It's just not going to work. You've got to love it, and you've got to love, if it's models you're into, you've got to really spend the time and be passionate about working with models, and you've got to search out the best models, the best makeup artists, and you've got to really invest the time. So passion, be passionate about it.
Passion. I think that's a fantastic bit of advice, and thank you, Zena, very much. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, this afternoon, sorry, depending where we are in the world. It's morning for both of us.
It's a bit early for us to be in public, isn't it?
I'm on my third cup of coffee, so I'm almost actually. So thank you very much, and I look forward to meeting up with you and chatting again at some point in the future.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
All the very best.
Thanks a lot.
Bye for now. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Back to you, Nora.
Thank you so much. I would like to say thank you so much, Zena, and also Adam, for a very insightful sharing. And Zena, I must say those are beautiful works that you have, and we love to see more of those in Singapore, definitely. So I would just like to invite everyone that is tuning in at the moment. Do stay tuned for the next session at 4:30 p.m. where we'll be talking about in conversation with David Strike, and it's going to be a talk on dive shops with Richard Nichols. And also, I would also like to share and invite all the underwater photographers that is tuning in at the moment to join us to be a part of our latest initiative for the upcoming ADEX Ocean Vision 2022, where we will be showcasing, underwater and ocean masterpieces from everyone on this really massive digital showcase that will be showcasing 2020 underwater imageries. And we theme it as the big picture, one ocean and one gallery. So this will be showcased on April 22nd to 24th in 2022. And so, if you are keen to showcase your work, please, by all means, I'll leave all the details at this live post, and we look forward to seeing the best that you can share with us. And once again, thank you so much, Adam. Thank you, Zena, and hopefully be able to see you in person.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.